Kia ora, everybody. First of all, I saw the video of that volleyball player hitting the other person on the other side and the person falling down. And we also heard about that walkout in California. So there are some things to be said for the internet and the global world. What has happened in New Zealand is that last week I reported we were waiting on the release of the report by the New Zealand Law Commission on whether to extend protections in the Human Rights Act for people who are transgender, people who are non-binary, and people with innate variations of sex characteristics. Well, the very next day, last Thursday, that report came out. It is absolutely bizarre. There is nearly 500 pages. Last time it was 200 and something pages for the issues paper. And they have concluded that there is a recommendation that we include in our Human Rights Act gender identity or its equivalents in the culture of the person.
Mhm.
And the second one is having an innate variation of sex characteristics, by which they mean DSDs. So they then go on to define, in several places actually, what being transgender is, and what non-binary is, and having variations of sex characteristics. However, they have a whole chapter in which they declare there is no definition of sex. They're unable to define sex. And one of the reasons why they think we should allow men who identify as women and people who declare they're non-binary into women's spaces is because we can no longer have a reliable record of a person's sex as assigned at birth. That's all the way through, your sex as assigned at birth. The reason why we can't reliably record what a person's sex is at birth is because we introduced self-sex ID, of course, and you could change your birth certificate. Therefore, we can't have single-sex spaces because there's no reliable identification form. Not that anyone carries their birth certificate around with them anyway. So some of the big issues in this report, of course, the language of the report is absolutely disgusting. I've only read the executive summary so far because I haven't received my copy of the full report. But they do say that submitters, including ourselves, did want to have a definition of sex in the Human Rights Act. There is only one place in the Human Rights Act currently where sex is defined as a man and a woman, and that is in a section about skills that our law is structured in the same way I think that you have in the UK and maybe other jurisdictions where they have the prohibited grounds for discrimination, but the majority of the legislation is carefully defining the carve-outs for different things such as race, religion, and of course sex. There are 19 exceptions in the Human Rights Act that allow for discrimination, positive discrimination. For example, in relation to employment, provision of single-sex spaces, and so on. So I can't actually see this. I have to turn this light on. So they say in the review, we explain that our review proceeds on the assumption that gender identity is not simply a belief or ideology, and that some people have a deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender that does not correspond with the sex they were assigned at birth. We heard from many people in consultation who are transgender or non-binary and whose individual experience of gender is deeply held. We do not think their experiences can simply be dismissed as a matter of ideology or belief. Recognition that it's legitimate for a person's gender identity to differ from their sex assigned at birth is deeply embedded in New Zealand law, as well as in the law of other countries with which we share a close legal heritage. Well, they don't seem to have read the Supreme Court decision in the UK. And in fact, it's not true that gender identity is deeply embedded in New Zealand law. If we think about some of the most important pieces of law for women, like the Employment Relations Act, the Equal Pay Act, they currently do not mention gender identity at all. And nor does the Education and Training Act, which of course has the section allowing for single-sex schools. And I'll come back to that because that has become an issue. So I won't go through the whole thing, but there are some things that are almost laughable. They think that, I'll just try to find it. Because obviously the three areas that I want to touch on are single-sex spaces and single-sex schools and single women's sports. There is a section on, in some of the exceptions, they are they're giving the employer the right to decide how to manage it. So, for example, in the case of providing intimate personal care, they've identified things such as waxing people's private parts, as they call it. And it sounds, doesn't it, like a man's written the report, a man who identifies as a woman. That's what we suspect. And for disabled or elderly people, vulnerable people who are having somebody come in and shower them, for example. And the other example was fitting bras. And so the employer is to decide, but they can't automatically exclude somebody who is a man pretending to be a woman from providing these services. So many cases you get your personal cares through an agency, and the agency could, of course, send somebody who identifies as a woman, even though you requested that you only want a woman to perform those. Now, one of the things that the reasons why they're giving the employer that right is because they say that our views on nudity in New Zealand are in a state of transition. And while some people are concerned about being undressed in front of somebody who's not related to them, that's not the case for everybody. So it's, it's in transition. There's another place where they're talking about, let me find it. Oh, here it is. It's deep, this particular section they're talking about is deeply ingrained social and cultural assumptions about nudity and whether it's acceptable to expose your body to people who are of a different sex. Given the importance of bodily privacy and the range of views relating to how social taboos are about being seen naked by people of a different sex to apply to gender identity, we think it's appropriate to extend this exception to, this will leave discretion to employers as experts in a particular field or in industry to manage any privacy issues. So there you go. You're just being an old-fashioned and so we get to the right. So at one stage they say, they say that we anticipate that under a law, this is in relation to single-sex spaces, that permitted service providers to restrict access to single-sex facilities based on a person's sex assigned at birth, all people with non-conforming gender presentation would find themselves confronted more often when using public facilities. Well, funny thing that currently in our Human Rights Act, they can exclude people of a different sex from single-sex spaces. They can do that already. So that what they're doing, though, is taking that away from us. So they say the primary concern raised by submitters who opposed a reform of this kind was that it would exacerbate safety risks for cisgender women and girls. Our research confirms that women are more likely to experience sexual violence than men, that sexual violence is usually perpetrated by men, and that many women have a significant fear of sexual violence.
Mm.
However, we have not found evidence to support the concern that clarifying the legal entitlement of people who are transgender to a single-sex facility that aligns with their gender identity exacerbates safety risks for cisgender women and girls. So I've got a big note in my paper here, but trans women are men. So they acknowledge that men commit most of the sexual violence against women, and yet the most men, of course, don't want to go into women's single-sex facilities. The ones that we want to keep out are exactly the ones they're saying they're okay, and that's the ones who want to go in there. So the other areas they're proposing that because they want transgender athletes to be able to participate in sport, they're going to allow sports organisations to make up their decisions about excluding transgender athletes from their sport. But there's some limitations on it, like your international sports organisation just not recognising that transgender athletes who are men rather, indeed, I'm getting a report, indeed, they can participate in sport, just not women's sports. So, so when we are just back to single sex spaces, they are saying that single sex facilities they're recommending, this has been, by the way, tabled in our parliament. They're recommending that service providers are not allowed to exclude a person from a facility that aligns with their gender identity. Um, and the reason why that's okay is because you might be in a facility as a woman and you don't really want any of these men who are also in that facility getting changed. You don't want them to see you getting changed. You can always go to the toilet stall. You know, put the seat down and put your clothes on the toilet seat, and then you could get changed in the toilet stall, which is usually quite small and would be very awkward. So they get privileged. They're allowed to get changed in the main area, but we have to go and hide in the toilets.
Yeah, as usual.
It's just ridiculous. But anyway, the other one is, of course, single-sex schools. Now, we most schools in New Zealand are state schools, and we also have what's called integrated schools, which are the Catholic schools, and Anglican schools and so on, and they are state funded, so they're another part of the act along with the state schools. And then we have these new charter schools, which we got from America, Kerry, and they are privately owned and operated, but publicly funded. So they also come under this provision, which allows for single sex schools. And and there's been a provision in there that they can accept like boys into a girls' school, but not so many of them as to change the nature of the single sex school. And the purpose of that was because sometimes a girls' school might not be offering the courses that are needed. So girls will go just for those courses to a boys' school and they'll be admitted for the purpose of those. But more and more, some of our elite boys' schools are accepting some girls at the senior level. So they're saying that provision, which I've looked at, has nothing to do with gender, doesn't mention gender identity in the Education and Training Act, but that they already can accept transgender kids. What they're doing now is extending this provision to all single-sex schools, including the ones that are private and don't have government funding. So that's going to create quite a stir, actually, because the people who send their kids to single-sex schools, the parents, generally have very strong opinions about that. And we've canvassed this on this call, because I know, Sheila, you, for one thing, are very strongly in support of single-sex schools for girls. So those are the main areas. So the next step is that the cabinet, which consists of a populist party, a bit like Farage's Reform, ACT, which is a libertarian, far-right libertarian party, and our National Party, which is like our Tories, they have to decide now whether to proceed with these recommendations. And basically, they systematically go through and gut all 19 sex exceptions in the Human Rights Act. And so we have to stop it from getting to Parliament, because, of course, if it goes to Parliament and it gets the support of the right, it will definitely, obviously, get the support of the left parties, the Greens, the Labour Party, and a Maori party. And so it will go through, and from there it'll be just, like dominoes all falling up one against the other. So that's our big news from New Zealand. And just to finally, the other news from New Zealand is that the Lava case, that's the lesbian activists visibility Aotearoa case in the Human Rights Tribunal, is continuing. It continued last week with the opening of the expert witnesses on the Pride Wellington side, accusing the lesbians who were there of being old-fashioned bigots, transphobes, and my friend who was there said it was really, really horrible, because these women were mostly older women who had gone through all the abuse that lesbians got when they were younger in the 60s and 70s. And so I won't be on the call next week, because I'm going to go and have a listen to the case myself on the 17th and 18th. So that's it from New Zealand. So